You're not alone. That's the idea. You're not alone in this difficult journey. And it is difficult. And like Dr. Albarelli was saying, it can result in anxiety for the caregiver, depression. Dementia caregivers have a huge, huge increased prevalence of overall depression. And yes, it can result in anger, resentment, grief, lots of fears, a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. It can also result in lost dreams. The idea that you're going to be able to, go and have retirement together, that you're going to be able to watch your children grow up or have grandchildren. It can be a lost dream for an adult child who's hoping that their parent with CTE was going to be able to help take care of the kids. But all those dreams of the future can be lost while someone's going through this. And caregivers don't just suffer emotionally, they can also suffer physically, in part because being a caregiver is in some cases a very full-time job, and that can result in the lack of time to do one's own self-care, like going to the doctor, your own doctor, to be able to exercise, to be able to do things like meditation and other relaxation and stress management tools. And all those things can result in stress-related illnesses. So caregivers go through a huge, difficult journey. And perhaps one of the most problematic things that can occur is intimate partner violence and abuse including physical, verbal, and sometimes emotional abuse. I'd like to now bring in Liz Nicholson Sullivan, who from 2009 to 2019 was the finance director for the Illinois State Senate Democratic Victory Fund. She's now a board member of Concussion Legacy Foundation, and she is the wife and caregiver of 9-year NFL veteran, former Cleveland Brown player Jerry Sullivan, who's now 68 years old and has suspected CTE. Liz is a leading advocate, not just in the Chicago area, but throughout the entire country for retired NFL players and their wives and families. Welcome, Liz.
Hi there. Thank you. Can you see me? Hi. Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you so much for being on this call today, or this webinar. And I tried to color my roots in COVID, but I know all us women, we suffer from a little vanity here. But first of all, I just wanted to say that this is a dynamite exercise, if you will, or platform for us to get our message out there. And first of all, the biggest message I want to say is, Shannon, everything that you said, I'm sure a lot of women and men on this call, their caregivers, literally saw themselves in every word you said. And Dr. Stern, Bob, you have been superb, as has the Concussion Legacy Foundation, Chris Nowinski et al., in bringing together a group of people that otherwise did feel so much shame and so much fear and felt so alone their whole lives, living with a partner with suspected CTE. So to give you a little bit of just a background, and then I'll kind of get into where we're at now. Before I say that, though, one of the themes that I keep hearing is the sense of loss. I'm sure many of you on this call understand that you almost, when you're the caregiver, you not only live your life, you live your partner's life for them. And their illness or their suspected CTE, their injury and the way they live or don't live, becomes your burden. So I'll get into that in a little bit. But anyway, my husband, Jerry Sullivan, unfortunately started playing football at a very early age. He started at 9 years of age, played 9 years, got 9 years vested in the NFL, and unfortunately played a couple more years in the USFL. So I like to say that we've got 24 years together. We're just right behind Kim and Mike, 25th wedding anniversary. 24 years we've been together, and he played 24 years of football. When you, add up 9 to 35, 36, when he ended his career at the USFL. So one thing I wanted to say is that I have found the way to cope with my situation, with my husband's multitude of problems, with his very far advanced illness, is to be honest and to tell the truth of what it is that we deal with these men and women. I know women have CTE as well, or suspected CTE. First, to let you know, I'd be lying to say that I didn't see symptoms of my husband. I first met him when he was 39 years old. And I just thought, oh, that's my track record, be with a guy who snorts cocaine, drinks too much, is a wild man. So those were kind of some of the warning signs that most people would have run from, but I happen to be someone who seems to run towards trouble, thinking I can fix it. So long story short, as many of you on the call have gone through, Jerry was diagnosed as being bipolar in the early stages of this CTE. And I sort of knew all along there was something that wasn't your usual bipolar or your garden variety mental illness with my husband, because of some of the things that both Shannon and Dr. Stern have talked about, some of the symptoms. I put a check mark next to apathy, agitation, rage, short fuse, impulsivity, and aggression, because he is textbook CTE. So just to let you guys know, what happened to us was that at 52, Jerry was diagnosed with dementia, early dementia. And we are currently right now, we got a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. I think you knew that, Dr. Stern. And the reason that I can actually call it Alzheimer's, he did have amyloid plaque on his frontal lobe. But obviously, I almost set Alzheimer's to the side. My husband has CTE, or suspected CTE. One of the things that I wanted to focus on and be truthful about, though, is Shannon pretty much covered a lot of the symptoms and the life that you live with someone with suspected CTE. But the biggest thing that I have found in common with so many of you wives and caretakers is the bane of my existence, two things: substance abuse, which is alcoholism, or alcohol abuse, as I like to say, which I've struggled with alcohol abuse with Jerry, I would say from the very beginning up until today, meaning literally last night. There have been periods of sobriety, but especially in this COVID nightmare, his drinking, unfortunately, has escalated to a point where it's really bad, where I'm living in a very, very dysfunctional world. And anyway, so he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and along the way, honestly, I will tell you, probably for the last 24 years we've been together, I've only had to call the police once when things got super, super bad. But a normal person would probably have left him by now, and probably would have had several instances where the police should have been called. But one of the things I think we experience as caretakers is not only the shame of living with a partner who is not only verbally abusive, but physically abusive. We deal with the fear of, if we don't stay with them and at least monitor them 24/7, I fear for the public. I fear for what my husband would do without me. So anyway, so one of the biggest things I would say that I'm struggling with right now is his drinking, his utter hopelessness, and his utter lack of any will to get better And Dr. Stern, I don't know what you would say about that, but that's one of the biggest things that I struggle with is he refuses to get help, partially because of the social isolation of his disease and the fact that I'm his world. I'm the one he hates the most and the one he loves the most. And it gets very, it gets very difficult to deal with the drinking on top of the fact that he is emotionally and sometimes menacing and physically threatening to me. And I know a lot of women go through that.
Liz, can I ask you to go back a little bit where you were saying that, other people would have called the police many, many more times.
Mm-hmm.
You're together 23 years and you're with this man who can be violent,
Mm-hmm.
can be out of control, can threaten, can be mean. I know you've told me of the violence can be the violence of vile words.
Right.
So why didn't you call the police? And why are you still together?
Dr. Stern, that's such a good question. And I think many of us caregivers and many of us wives of these men question ourselves quite often on that. I think that the reason that I'm still with him is because I know that he's sick. So it's almost a double-edged sword. I understand so much of it, as so many of you on the phone call understand it. As Shannon was saying, if she could, go back in time and realize just how sick Mike was. I think the reason that I stay with him is because I always have a little bit of hope in the back of my mind that there will be something to mitigate his symptoms. All of us on this call, we could be registered pharmacists, if you will, because we all know all of the different drugs we've tried over the years to mitigate the violence or to stop the rage. But it's like you're in a war and you love this person so much, you have the intelligence and you have the tools to know they're sick. And I don't want to leave him, frankly, because I fear he'll die. And I literally mean that I think if I were to leave him, he would commit suicide, which he has suicidal ideation, especially in COVID right now. He feels very hopeless. He
That's
watches.
A lot of pressure on you.
Yes, it is. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. And I think that I take on so much. And I think there's so much fear that so many of us caregivers have that if we leave them, I'm the one that sleeps with this man in the same bed as this man every night, not his family, not his children who abandon him and don't want anything to do with dad because they think he's crazy. So I feel so responsible for him and responsible for the outcomes of leaving him. I really truly think I couldn't do it. And I never would give advice to a woman who's in the same situation to stay, especially if they have little kids, because of the violence and because of the emotional abuse as well. But when it's you and when it's your husband and you know that they're sick, you stay. And that's what I do. I stay and I say to my closest friends, I'm in it for the long haul. Kind of sucks, but I am. And it's tough. So I don't have a lot of answers, but it's especially tough now in COVID, as you know.
You may not have answers, you think, but just sharing your story the way you did, I have a feeling helped a huge, huge amount to so many people watching this. One of the final things I want to bring up to you is you raised that early diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Yes.
And what we found is that so many people who wind up being diagnosed with CTE after death have a history of bipolar disorder being diagnosed earlier in life. when it probably was never bipolar. You know, definitely a lot of people do have bipolar disorder, but some of the behaviors, some of the emotional discontrol, some of the impulsivity in a younger person can be misdiagnosed as bipolar. And
Mm-hmm.
have you ever had any subsequent uh, um, clinician tell you, you know, I don't think it's bipolar, or I'm not sure that was the right diagnosis?
Yes, and you know, Dr. Stern, you brought something up earlier that a lot of women on this call, we talk to one another about, because we feel that a lot of doctors are not well versed on what it really is. Finally, I think because of the resources and because of Concussion Legacy Foundation, because of some other, through the NFL concussion settlement, obviously, I've gone to some fine neurologists and other neuropsych doctors. So obviously bipolar was sort of set to the side, and the diagnosis is he's got Alzheimer's because he does have the amyloid, the telltale amyloid plaque, but it is suspected CTE. But I would say that probably, and I live in Chicago, 80% of the doctors that we've gone to, Dr. Stern, I understand CTE better than they do. They don't, and part of the problem is, I hate to say this, and many women on this call would agree, we're up against, it's David and Goliath here. We're up against still a league, and I'm not going to get into the machinations of the legality of the suit, but we are up against a society and a league that honors and sort of worships these guys, these heroes. Yet behind the scenes, I always say they foisted these volcanic men on women and children to deal with post-football. And good luck. That's sort of what they do. And it's hell. It's very difficult to know what to do with these men.
And that just raises yet another issue for a fair number of people who may be on this webinar, the folks who are partners with a former NFL player or former other professional athlete who, you know, there is this big cultural thing that makes it perhaps even harder for the caregiver to deal with. Well, Liz, thank you very, very much for sharing what you've been going through in such a
Certainly. Thanks. Thank you.